Going forward, we are down to our final session of the UEF World Summit 2020. With all the varied sectors and topics touched upon in our multiple sessions over the last 3 days, it is now time to bring it all together with this session titled Economic Inclusion, a crucial success factor for nation building. And the moderator for this session is Ms. Rehana Amir, the first Indian-born woman to be elected in March 2017 as a Common Councillor in the City of London Corporation's 950 years of history. She's a serial entrepreneur with ventures in consulting, IT, engineering and management, education and healthcare, with over 25 years experience managing businesses worth multi-million pounds. She's a fellow of the Royal Society of Arts and is an honorary member of CEO Clubs Network UAE. She's also a trustee of Trust of London and is an international advisor for the UEF. Over to you, ma'am, to introduce the speakers and take us through the session. Economic inclusion. Of working-age women in India, only 20% are actually employed. Although the Indian economy has been rapidly growing, the participation of women in the workforce has been steadily declining from 42% in 2004 to 20% in 2019. In the Global Gender Gap Index, India ranked 112, and in Economic Gender Gap, 149, even behind South Asian neighbors. In China, since the Cultural Revolution of the 1960s and 1970s, women employment has become one of the highest in the world, as women have labored shoulder to shoulder with men. In 2015, Chinese female workers contributed 40% of China's total GDP, while this number did not exceed 17% in India. While women in the workforce together with men can propel our economy remarkably, the challenges faced by women in India are multidimensional. They are affected by cultural, economic, structural factors like gender roles, workforce biases, and lack of access to services. According to a McKinsey report, advancing gender parity can add $12 trillion to the global GDP. By 2030, female entrepreneurship can generate approximately 50 million direct and 100 million indirect jobs. The Government of India and the private sector can reap rich rewards by providing flexible jobs, expanding skills, restructuring policies, adopting diversity and redesigning infrastructure to ensure equal opportunities and contribution.
I would like to thank all my esteemed panelists for taking out your time from your incredibly busy schedules and joining us here this evening. So I'd like to now open up the panel discussion and just give you a brief overview of the context of our topic. In the race of global prosperity, women and other minorities struggle to keep pace because of various barriers such as cultural, legal, and financial. To promote full and productive employment and growth, economies should ensure inclusion. Women's participation in nation building boosts productivity, increases economic diversification, enhances income equality, and promotes social stability. It lays the foundation of long-term sustainable growth. India is a growing economy, but while the number of jobs created has increased and education level has risen, Indian women participation in the workforce has declined from 42.7% in 2004-2005 to 23.3% in 2017 to 18% by 2019. The female labor force participation had reached an even lower rate of 20.5%. There are 432 million working-age women in India. According to the UNGC India study found that raising women's participation in the labor workforce to the same level as men can boost India's GDP by 27%. On this background, I would like to now open our panel discussion, Economic Inclusion, a Critical Success Factor for Nation Building. So my first question would be to Seema. If we want more women to be actively part of developing an inclusive economy, there is more to do for every country for their parliaments to reflect the society it serves. So please, can you share some ideas on what actions can be undertaken to tackle the underrepresentation of women in parliament, including changing the law?
Thank you very much, Rehana, and my congratulations to you and to UEF and all involved in this really wonderful conference. I want to start by saying I think there is much that can be shared between our nations, because the challenges we face on women's contribution to our economic growth and prosperity, to what that means for women's incomes and the stability for their lives, their children's lives, family lives, it's a story that we all are still, I think, discovering, and one in which I think the progress both in when you talked about cultural and legal and social kind of contributions, the laws and the contribution of women's voices to political decision making can be very critical in how a nation frames and leads public opinion in these matters. I think it's helpful perhaps to share a couple of things that we've had in the UK and in recent years that's helped increase the representation of women in Parliament. Because in the UK we are at perhaps the highest level ever, about 34% of women in Parliament, still very much below the leaders on the world stage on this, but there are differences by political parties as well. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So with the Labour Party, we have over 50% now, about 51% of our parliamentary party are women. That in fact was in our rule book. So as a party, we had made a choice some years ago that it was an aspiration that we had, and that we would seek to move our internal processes for the selection of candidates in that direction. And in addition, what we had done when we were in power was that we had legislated for all women shortlists to be allowed in constituency seats. It is, I think, a matter that wasn't without controversy, even within our own party, mm-hmm. where there were those who felt excluded, who then did not felt they had not had the chance to go forward. But we won that argument because we were able to show the benefit to the party overall, and that there were still opportunities for equal opportunities for men as well. It meant that we stepped forward, and the representation we have of over 50% is more than what the other parties have put together. And indeed for the government party. What that means as well is that you have to have a view about how within Parliament you are looking not just to have women at the back, sort of backbench level, but how you're bringing women forward into the front bench and into the most senior positions. And this is something where, even on the government side, when it comes to International Women's Day, or it comes to, other points in the calendar, the government will be challenged and asked the question, even from their own party, about how many women do you have in the cabinet? How many women do you have in the shadow cabinet, which is the senior team for each political party? And then also at ministerial level. So I will say that this does require, firstly, in terms of outcomes, that you have those targets that are within parties, as well as those that become shared goals for parliaments. Secondly, you translate that into where women are in Parliament, even as chairs of committees and members of committees, and not just committees that might be looking at those that you might see as gender interest areas, but economic policy, foreign policy. These are matters for women as well. And these are, so our point is as well that we challenge the representation of women in all of these parts of our parliamentary and political life. And I would just close by saying this, as well as where we saw the change in the law and where that then got challenged and we had to keep winning the argument, and that argument continues to be one that we need to win. I think the proof of the outcomes is the biggest win. in that, when we can actually say and all celebrate together the reason why British Parliament overall has seen the increase is because political parties make that choice first. They practice what they preach, and then they are able to win those arguments in Parliament. Just one final point, this comes up again and again. In our country, this is now coming up again in relation to first Brexit policy and how many women's voices are involved in that. And secondly, in terms of COVID policy, in terms of how decisions are made, because on the government level, it's been noticed that the voice of women has been absent from the very top jobs and the very top voices in political decision making around COVID. That is noticeable, and it is now reflecting on the government's performance and confidence in that in terms of all voices being heard. So I would argue this, that equality in political decision making that impacts and looks at how we run political parties and choices that party administrations make, in the end leads to confidence in government and in public decision making. That's got to be a matter of concern to us all.
Yeah, thank you, Seema. Very insightful. And in terms of one good initiative which you mentioned about the all-women shortlist, I think that's something, an amazing initiative which I'm sure a lot of other democracies around the world would really put into practice. And some of them have already put that sort of an initiative in their parliamentary selection of their candidates. And in terms of now, you mentioned about the targets. So I think now it's more time for action and set targets for us to. We all are empowered. We've talked about empowerment for several years now. But as you rightly said, it's time now for some action to have targets so that it's a shared goal across all political parties. So yeah, thanks for that insight, Seema. So my next question would be to James. Is economic inclusion equivalent to inclusive growth? And what are the features of inclusive growth compared to conventional growth?
Thank you very much, Rehan, and listen to the Member of Parliament with a great deal of interest. Economic inclusion is something that has concerned economic policymakers probably for 80 or 100 years, especially after the Great Depression of the 1930s, where it became clear that large portions of the economy were not benefiting from the fruits of economic growth, from the economy as a whole. And of the excluded, clearly then and now, women make up the most important mass, the most important group. I don't want to say the minority because women are in the majority and they're excluded. But I think it's important to note that for economists, the women, very important sector of the excluded, but also other groups. There are other groups that are excluded, certain from a community point of view, sometimes because of lack of skills and the like. And so essentially, economic inclusion is the policy thinking of how to bring everyone into the economy so that they can benefit as much as possible. And that must start, of course, as Seema's reminded us, at the political level. If there's not representation, it's going to be difficult to get economic benefits flowing. But I think there are also the number of tools of how you get inclusion, and these are things that we will be discussing over these days. I think I'm not going into them in detail, but I think it is important to see that it starts at the political level. It must go through the different steps to make sure that you actually have tangible results. Now, economic growth is somewhat different. It's a much more recent science. It's really some of the thinking that's been done by people like Sir Angus Deaton at Princeton, or Esther Duflo, who got a Nobel Prize recently, for some of the work that they've done to take a look at what's happened in the economy, basically since perhaps the 80s, but most importantly, since the Great Recession of 2008 and 2009, when something very strange has happened, and that is we've had relatively robust growth in rich countries, in advanced economies, but that growth has all accumulated to the very top end of the income scale. And it's a very interesting phenomenon for economists like myself. It's a very worrisome phenomenon for policymakers. So I think the thinking now, you have the inclusion, but what's happening with the inclusive growth is that, of course, women are falling behind in many ways. They're often those who are the caregivers, those who are at the lower end of the income scale. But we're also seeing sort of zones of a shadow, if you like, an economic shadow in regions. We're finding regions are falling behind. I could, refer in this country, in the United States, to places like Detroit, the industrial wastelands of the form of the Rust Belt, as we call it, where there are big zones where there's absolutely nothing going on, no potential, no opportunity. You get it, for example, in the UK, the north of England, around Sunderland. It's very different if you go to around London or if you go to the home counties. In France, you get the sort of the banlieue, as they call it, north of Paris, the 9-3, or perhaps Villeurbanne and Lyon. These are places where there's no economic activity, there are no financial services, there are no supermarkets for fresh fruit, there's no employment, there's no hope. And so I think inclusive growth is, how can we ensure that the growth, once we have it, and we sort of know now how to generate growth, that how it benefits everyone, it benefits women as the most important disadvantaged group, but also benefits areas that are left behind, benefits other communities that it might be excluded for sexual preference, for religion, for whatever it may be. So that's really the work that the G7 has been focusing on. And I think that it's really important for us to see that we can do all the talking we like, but it's ultimately through action on the ground, through specific interventions and through regulatory frameworks that promote those interventions specifically. For example, make sure that disadvantaged groups, and in particular women, have access to financial services through financial inclusion, that they have access to decent schooling, that there's not a bias against women or against certain ethnic groups in primary schools, that they never get the skills that allow them to become integrated, that they have access to things like infrastructure. So these are a whole range of very specific things that we as economists need to think about to ensure that economic inclusion and economic growth all lead to greater inclusiveness.
Yeah,
so
sure.
I hope that distinguishes the difference between the two.
Thank you, James. Yes, I mean, now I think with the COVID, the pandemic, I think the term inclusive growth has become all the more important and powerful. So on that note, Seema, I would like to just share some statistics and then ask something about the gender gap issue, with that gender pay gap issue which we have. So in 2019, India ranked 112th out of 153 countries in the Global Gender Gap Index, falling 4 places from 2018. And this was mainly due to its economic gender gap. The gender gap pay and equal pay are not the same. And the gender pay gap is a universal issue in most of the countries around the world. So it's not just an issue for India alone, it's universal. So, I did see you asked a recent question at Parliament regarding the gender pay gap reporting. So I would like to know what, in your view, are the causes of the gender pay gap, and what are some ideas that you have which you think can help close this gap?
Thank you very much, Rahana. And I want to just answer this question in the context also of what James has very powerfully laid out in terms of any sort of inclusive strategies that you might have, and how there are political choices that inform economics. All too often, people separate politics and economics as if they don't have any connection, but political decisions, around, for example, how you might set a wage level. In the UK, it's been the minimum wage that Labour brought in when we were last in government. It was opposed at the time by the Conservatives, who saw it as holding back business freedoms and therefore for employment, because it would disincentivise employment. In actual fact, that wasn't the case. And what's interesting is now we have a Conservative government that has sought to increase the minimum wage and is championing that as part of how it's on the side of the lowest paid in society. It's an issue on which, in a sense, we have built a consensus that was not there before, because politics led a change, and that really brought up women's income levels, because it was often women who were in professions on lower pay, often seen as lower skill, and therefore being paid less. Now, you can argue that some of those professions aren't lower skill, but they are the places in which women are more in the workforce than they are in the management. And so the voice of women in terms of actually, is this equal work and should it be equally recognised, was another part of the debate that continues to be ongoing. And in a sense, in the UK, it's now moved to what's the real living wage? What's the wage on which people need to live? Because below that, the minimum wage, if what it requires is supplementary pay from a social security system in order that people can do the very basics of trying to pay rent, which even itself is in question at the moment, and put food on the table for their families, the things we take for granted as the base level for humanity and society. These things have become a big challenge even in the UK, where we've seen the growth of food banks a lot as a result of economic policy, and the evidence shows that. So in terms of gender pay, it's very tied to inclusive growth and inclusive outcomes. Because if people are working very long hours, as they might be, or balancing hours with childcare and looking after children, which in itself is a huge stress and strain, as we know, and we want children to grow up being safe and with good mental health and all of those things, somebody's got to take the time to spend with children in family environments too. So these are all connected with how we see society should run itself, and some of those rules about how we want an economy to grow. And I think the fact that we've seen, as James has outlined, that in a sense wealth has been increasingly concentrated with those who are wealthier, is a consequence also of how decisions have been made about who gets what in an economic system. So I think in terms of equal pay as well, I want to just mention a couple of things, because just a week or so ago we had Equal Pay Day in the UK, which was the day on which women from then onwards, from November the 20th onwards to the rest of the year, effectively are working for free because of the differential in pay that men and women receive in the UK. And so, that and how it varies between full and part-time employees is an increasing policy debate. One of the initiatives that we've had has been to seek the publication of the gender pay gap in companies over a certain number of employees, to start with, over 250 employees. What's been interesting is the sluggish way in which employers have responded to that. In my view, it's, lay the facts out there. It's not challenging you to change something. It's just up to you to be public about how women and men are paid differently in your organization. And inevitably, however, transparency drives public debate even further. So the interesting experience that we've had over the first couple of years is that reluctance of employers to come forward and to publish late, the lack of enforcement because of a government that's sort of been reluctant to do this but knows it needs to happen. And then thirdly, we saw the suspension of that as well when COVID arrived, which I couldn't understand, because you can't, why use COVID as an excuse for that? You're still going to be paying people one way or the other. So I think these questions about how we've got to make decisions as a society about whether we're going to look to better pay and fair pay, and historically that's affected women's work much more than it has men's. Secondly, whether we're going to look to structures like transparency, even before legislating even further, at least have transparency in what the situation is, that put these issues on the boards of the public and the private sectors. And thirdly, we look to where we might say as a society, look, we're going to enforce that, particularly around the minimum wage, the living wage, and those arguments. Because what we've also seen is that there's been loss of confidence where employers don't even pay the legally required minimum wage, that the enforcement around that hasn't been invested in. So on these issues, the economy and politics come together, but you also need to build the public argument to give permission to take those steps.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Seema. Yes. I mean, it all depends on how the private sector and the public sector come and force together to see build a society the way we want it to work. And especially, I think with COVID, it has become a bit more apparent. And always it's been the women who are really been the first targeted group who has been on the receiving end in terms of any policy changes, be it at the corporate level or at a government level. So I think that mind shift has to happen, and it's not always that anything and everything can be just imposed on women, and the changes made, some very radical changes are made without any good thinking in terms of what the effect it might be. So I would like to just hold the thought on that, and possibly with Hilda, I would like to ask you, Hildegard, with your experience as a key member of the Diversity and Inclusion Working Group at EBRD, can you share some insights if there is a special tool to inclusion or a recipe to make it work? Because we've understood, what are the challenges, what are the issues, but it would be really helpful if you could share some ideas what you in your role as a member of the working group were able to bring in these kind of initiatives at within your organization.
Thank you very much, Rihanna. I think I'm very pleased that I'm invited to this panel and that I can share my personal experience. When the president of the EBRD asked me to look into that subject, I really, first of all, faced a lot of resistance. There is no need for a change. Why? Everything worked out very well, which wasn't true. And so one of the tools, or let's say the success factors, definitely is you need a champion at high level. This at all moments, not only to initiate such a discussion, but also later on to have it really put in place, because it's nice to have a strategy. More importantly, it should be a policy, because then it is embedded in the corporate governance behavior and changes behavior, making people commit to live accordingly, and also to enforce it in case it's not applied. We had a huge interest of people to join the group, which was overwhelming. And I was very pleased about that. Through the whole discussion, it came across that there was a real need of such a discussion. And the different steps that we put in place were very well received. Still, there was resistance, but the more senior management made it clear it is important to us, it is important to the institution, the more the resistance, first of all, not vanished, but really became no longer an issue. And it has created something which I would really like to mention. It had more motivation of the people, very different groups within, because diversity is not only about gender. We just said it's religion, ethnic group, handicapped people. It went beyond just gender issue. It is definitely one of the most important, but it was absolutely wider than that. More motivation, participation of many people, and they all said they feel much more respected, and through respect you get more people to commit, to come up with ideas, to work much closer together. So I strongly believe it is important to have a champion, and if you move into it, make it really a policy and embed it into the corporate governance, so then you can really make it work, and have a champion beyond. It cannot stop putting it in place, having it approved, and then people carry on as before. It needs really to follow through and to make sure that people live according to it, because then it's a win-win situation for everybody.
Sure. Thank you, Hildegard. I mean, we are pressed on time with Seema. So maybe one last question to you, Seema, before we finish your points. So at a policy level, how do you think governments can build productivity and shared prosperity? Because this is something James also mentioned about wealth being just concentrated to only a few people, and it's not a shared economy across. So on that aspect, so how at a policy level, how do you think governments can build productivity and shared prosperity through economic inclusion for long-term sustainable growth?
Thank you very much, Rihanna. I think this is the question. This is absolutely the question as we go into 2021. for partly the reasons that James outlined, in that we're going to see a rebuilding of our economy, and employment and future growth is going to be I think the biggest challenge that we face, because in a sense we've got the confidence that we're going to come out of the health crisis earlier than perhaps nations anticipated. The next ongoing crisis is going to be jobs and employment, and to rebuild confidence. But we are going to need to see coordinated planning between, for example, in the UK, and this will be the same in different ways in other nations, between the centre, the regions and the local. One of the important developments that we've seen during COVID has been the coming together of communities, where when we had lockdown, you did not have the possibility of the centre being able to reach into communities. And there was much running to catch up, partly because over the course of the last 10 years, we've actually seen, for political and ideological reasons, that and this is political in the sense of bringing more into the centre rather than investing in local structures, that local government was weaker than it had been in the past. And part of that led to the running to catch up. It has led to a debate about what should be done where. And we are seeing local areas develop their own economic development responses because they understand how COVID has impacted on local economies. They understand where different sectors have been held back. In our area, it's very much around aviation, around the cultural industries, and we have a strong health sector. And so the economic development plans are very much looking to how to build back in those sectors, also diversify, and how they can look to synergies across some of those sectors. The question then is how you're going to work with city halls say, for example, with the London Mayor, and build the arguments with the government, where there needs to be a more flexible, in my view, industrial strategy that has the overview of how a nation's going to look towards its competitiveness in the future. For Britain, that's going to be increasingly important post-Brexit, because we're redefining our place and our role, and where we're going to want to see some of the bigger ticket items on which we make a difference. So we are going to have to plan now, because an economic strategy, it needs a jobs plan with it. That jobs plan is going to need a skills plan. And too often nations don't plan all of those things together, with the result that there are lots of bits and pieces that happen without that coordination. On the ground, what that means is that our local colleges that may serve the populations of sort of 100 or 200,000 around them need to know what courses they should invest in, because they too will have to make hundreds of thousands of pounds worth or dollars worth of decisions for new facilities. They need to plan those in conjunction with companies. Those companies don't have the confidence unless they know what the legislation might be. For example, if I take the example of the green economy and decarbonisation, if the government's plans keep changing, where is it that the government wants our country to head to in 20 or 10 years' time? And how do we plan as industry and then for jobs and skills on the back of that? So I think more than ever, we are going to need to coordinate, but we're going to need to do that in an inclusive way. And I say that because far too much of the dialogue that's very easy from large economic institutions, from academia and from government is very male-led language. When we talk about infrastructure and we talk about things that feel like construction, they feel very gender biased. And unless we have a way in which we're changing the language to be more inclusive, look at the structure of jobs that are going to be behind that, to be male and female friendly, look at the way courses are designed and implemented so that women feel that's a place for me too. This is going to require the voice of women and some voices in our national economic planning. It's the way in which those decisions we made now and the billions that will follow those decisions are going to be critical. And I will just end by making this point, because the Labour Party in the UK developed a green economic strategy, in a sense, for the sort of 400,000 jobs we would want to see coming on stream next year, which requires planning, because otherwise a lot of what we're finding is the decisions are not going to make any impact for after people have been unemployed for a year or even 18 months. But planning now for what those jobs are and having funding behind them It was followed up by the government's 10-point plan, which is important because it does signify again that there's cross-party views on this. But when I've looked into this, what I've seen is that the updating of thinking around green skills and what that means for universities, for schools, for in-place work skilling hasn't been updated. So the strategies are not joined up. And unless we do that, and we do that very fast, and we incentivize local partnerships to lead, because in a post-COVID world, we will not be back to normal even for some time with confidence to travel and all of those things. We have a plan now that plans for what we want the outcomes to be. That is going to also require our national and international institutions to form and help develop strategies that nations can learn from. And I would like us to have a different set of criteria about what we're going to see as success, learning from what did not work well 10 years on from the last economic crisis into what story we want to tell in 10 years' time from now.
Thank you, Seema. Really some very serious topics, and I think it requires more time and more debate in terms to get into the more finer details to understand how this whole planning process has to work. So, I mean, I think the key takeaways from the whole session, I feel so far is that we need the right planning for the jobs, the skills, and most importantly, the funding. I think that's a very critical element that is needed to ensure that there is proper implementation and execution of those creation of jobs, of those preparing that green skills that we need for a green economy in the next 10, 15 years. And I think most importantly also is measuring those desired outcomes. And I think it's a long exercise, but it's good that most of the governments have started thinking in these lines. And this is where I think the private sector and public sector and the governments should form in a kind of a coalition to see how we could really create that participation of women into this whole economic ecosystem so that we could achieve the desired outcome or the desired GDPs that every country aspires to. So thanks once again, Seema, for your time. And I'm sure you'll be able to join us in the question and answer session towards the end of the panel discussion. So thanks. Thank you.
Rihanna, I'd like to just add a few points for Seema.
Oh, yes, Irshad, please.
Yeah. I thank you to the Honorable Minister. It was, Seema, it was a pleasure hearing what you said. I'd like to just add a few points on behalf of the private sector, if you wish, and private industry. I think today there is an understanding among the progressive companies, and the thought being that there is fundamental synergy between social progress and economic efficiencies, right? So there are companies, we work with companies like Marks and Spencer's and companies like Clark's making footwear for them. We are the largest suppliers globally for these brands, for these companies. And they are actively involved with us in recognizing that it's a choice in terms of how we approach issues, social issues of social inclusion, gender, pay gap that we encounter, and these companies work with us very actively. And it is really a pleasure when you have a strategic alignment on working towards solving these large global social issues from the private sector taking an active input, and when you have your clients endorsing these policies that we follow. So I underline what you just said. Definitely it's a choice. I think the private sector is starting to recognize that it makes economic sense as well as in supporting these social activities and social progress.
Thank you, Irshad. Thank you very much, Seema, and looking forward to you joining in our Q&A sessions. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, Irshad, thanks for your some very important, points which you mentioned, how the collaboration works. So I would like to ask you a question in terms of what role can the private sector and industrialists play in creating an inclusive society, and possibly maybe you can share some examples from your organization, how this the concept of inclusion and the society can happen through the support of the corporates.
Thank you, Rihanna. Thank you for this opportunity. I'll start from a macro level and work my way down to Tamil Nadu, India, Tamil Nadu, and then to Ambur, where I'm from. From a macro level, I think we all have to accept and understand that there is a global shift. There's a huge shift in the global economy in terms of where the wealth is moving away slowly from governments to corporates, right? Today, if you look at the 100 largest economic entities, according to the survey that I read recently, it said almost 69 of the largest global economic entities are actually corporates. And so you've got the United States, China, and then kind of you work your way down, and you've got Apple, and then you've got Russia, and then you work your way down. So it's incredible that the 10 largest corporates in the world are richer than 180 countries in the world, right? Yeah. So that puts it in perspective as to where the real wealth is getting amassed. And to add to what James said, the richest 1% of the world owns 50% of the world's wealth. So this is getting skewed more and more every year. I mean, this is something to be really worried and concerned about. And then you've got to then ask, what is the government's role? And when you look at these large socio-economic issues or social challenges that we are faced with, you may begin to question and ask, who really has the resources to actually address this? And I believe it is really the corporates who have the resources, and it is their moral obligation. And, having gone to business school where I was taught that Milton Friedman, the famous economist, said the sole purpose of business is to focus on profits. And that's it, right? And that's the kind of mindset that business worked all these years. Private sector worked on that. But then I went back to school again last few years back to do a master's at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy, and I came across what Professor Michael Porter's theory on creating shared value. And his belief really is that there is a fundamental synergy between social progress and economic efficiency. So he urges private sector to look to solve social issues, right? So put this on a macro level context, and then I'll now narrow it down and bring it down to India and my business and give you some perspective of where I'm looking at it, how I'm looking at it, right? We run a small family business down in the south of Tamil Nadu, in the north of Tamil Nadu in South India, in a place called Ambur. We make shoes. We employ close to 28,000 people. 95% of them are women.
Wow.
Okay? And
amazing.
I'll refer to what Seema said. It's a choice. This decision to make it 95% women is a corporate decision by choice. And then we went about implementing this. It wasn't easy. We had to change. We had to adapt. We changed our strategies. And because we honestly believe that if you have a happy factory, if you've got a good society where there is social equity, your output will be better, people will be happier, and you're going to be profitable on the longer run. Don't look at the short run, look at the longer run, right? Yeah. So I have been living this in the last 25 years that I've been in business, in the family business. And we have earnestly tried to improve year on year and try to be more inclusive as possible. And mind you, to a sector or a segment of the population that is probably facing the largest social exclusion that they have had in many, many years. Yeah, you're talking about rural women who are in the minority religion, who are based 300 kilometers away from the nearest city, right? So we've seen incredible progress in doing what we've done, and it's something that I'd love to share with everyone and explain what are the steps we've taken to bring about this kind of social inclusion and socio-economic change within the community by having done that. If you wish, I don't know, I guess I'm running out of my time limit.
Yeah, I just wanted to hold your thoughts there, Irshad, because I think what the important point you've mentioned here is it's not just the responsibility of the government to come up with the policies and procedures and support. I think even corporates themselves have a kind of a responsibility to see how they could do or create those smaller ecosystems, start creating that impact at a small level when joined up together can become a big major force. So, and yes, I should say you and your organization should be really proud of when you said that you have 95% of women as your workforce, which is something very incredible achievement that you have done in your organization. And possibly maybe my next question would be around what sort of policies or conducive environment you made for your women employees. But before that, one you mentioned about the employment aspect. The other aspect which I would like to touch upon is the creating and fostering the environment for entrepreneurship and innovation. And perhaps maybe Hilda, with your experience, I would like to ask you a question on what can be really done to create as many women entrepreneurs as possible, because one study showed that female entrepreneurship can generate over 50 to 60 million direct jobs by 2030 and increase indirect employment by 100 to 110 million people. So on that context, what do you think? How can a forum like this, a summit like this can be that platform to create more entrepreneurs?
Thank you for that question. It is a very valid one because entrepreneurial behavior of men and women are totally different. And one of two things are very important to address, and the forum and UAF can play a key role. Awareness, encouragement of women that they can do it. This is something you would rather hear a man can do it. Much more often a woman would say, oh, I may not be qualified. Oh, I may not. Encouragement. Yes, you can. This, of course, should be aligned with some basic courses. What I've come across that companies, young entrepreneurs do lack basic, for example, a little bit of calculation, a little bit of management. And there, a forum can be very elementary in providing such courses because they know what they do on their business side, that they may lack on putting it properly in place. And that's why it is so important. How do I approach my business plan? And business plan in a modest way, not in a 28 pages script. This is, a real small one. And do a regular update. That is something where outside help can be very, very instrumental. And secondly, and even equally important, is women tend not to borrow. Although they are known by all banks in the world, they are the much better clients because they repay. They're better payers than are men. This is a fact. They have not invented it. And but women do not go to a bank and want to say, I need a loan. So there is a very important, and the EBRD here has made great progress in reaching out to female entrepreneurs, having in a bank trained bankers that reach out to women and proposing them, you could grow much faster if you were to borrow. This is something that needs to be actively promoted. And, it doesn't have to be big amounts, but these are two areas where, and this is very relevant to India and in particular to less developed areas, because it's a new. Tell a banker, yeah, they have to reach out to the client. They're much more used to having them come to the office. No, it has to be in another way. And this increases the awareness, and it also shows then to the women that they can at two levels. And I think these are relatively simple measures that can be put in place, and for small companies in particular. So I think these are two tools where this improves the environment for women. First of all, to encourage them to do it and to second it with some necessary training, and later on, once they are established, to encourage them also to grow faster, because they are creating new jobs with the growth. I think these are my recommendations.
Yeah, absolutely, very vital, Hildegard. And so we've created that entrepreneurs to help us induce that business growth, but we also need the workforce. And I think this is where I would like to get some insights from Irshad of what they have done differently, what kind of policies they initiated or implemented in their organization to achieve that 95% of women workforce in your company, Irshad. And maybe possibly these could be some very good ideas for our delegates attending here today to get some inspiration and possibly try to start thinking in those lines and implementing these kind of policies, because it's a very successful case study. It has worked in a very traditional environment, and I'm sure it can be an easy reference point to take this to the wider business community as such. On to you, Irshad, please.
Thank you, Rihanna. I think, like I said earlier, once you've decided and made it that it's a choice, that's the strategy you wish to establish, then you've got to go about taking, your accepting and recognizing that most policies tend to be gender biased, and therefore you've got to negate a lot of these biases, right? So that's what we did when we started off. We said, okay, let's take the women workforce and say what are the challenges they are going to face. For instance, timings, right? It's flexibility in timings was a major issue. So we were the first company in the industry to move to a shift system and gave the option for the women to choose different shifts in different work timings. And that immediately hit off really well, where people who are, there were married women who preferred to come in the second shift because they wanted to get their kids to school, do the cooking at home, whatever, and then come to work. And then there were younger women who preferred to work the morning shift and then have the second half of the day free. Then transport and dependency on transport on their husbands for whatever was another issue. So we said, okay, we'll go to a walk-to-work policy. So we started setting up factories in and around the closest areas where the workers, where the employees would be available. So none of our factories, all our factories follow walk to work. We don't commute people in buses, and we don't bring them away too far from their houses. The third thing is, for instance, we said, what is it that they care about? They care about the education of their children, the well-being of their children. So let's that out of their mind. So education for kids in terms of tuition services, we have numerous tuition centers set up across all our factories and in the neighborhood to address all our employees' kids, their educational concerns. It's taught by our own employees. They are the tutors as well, and they teach and take care of them. And we follow with our system the progress of these children, how well they do in school, which areas they need help. So the parents feel comfortable that their issues are being taken care by the company. Healthcare needs. We offer free healthcare. We offer doctor medical services in all our factories units, so that anyone or any of the workers their whole family can walk in for getting any medical help. So when you address these issues, the rest becomes easy. Now you've kind of evened the playing field, and now they are happy, they don't have the stress, they don't have the fear, they don't have the concerns, and now their productivity surges. They are far better productivity than the male workers. I've been criticized for being biased against men because of these policies, so I take that lightly now because it's okay. But we actually have an issue with unemployment being higher among men in Ambur, in where I'm from, than it is among women. So these are certain policies that we did. We also brought in, we insist on the family walking into the companies. We have specific days every week where we encourage our employees to bring their families so that they can see where they're working. And we talk to them about the potential for progress. So it's engagement, communication, and addressing those needs. And we've seen tremendous success in terms of how willing they are to come to work.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think this is an amazing, story what you've shared, Irshad. I think it is all about what is the kind of society we aspire and how do we want to make it part of our corporate culture so that we make it more conducive for everyone to be part of it. And I think I'm sure our delegates attending here today would be got a lot of inspiration from you, and possibly maybe they might get in touch with you to get some mentorship advice in drafting or designing these policies. So I would like to now have a common question to both Hildegard and James with regards to the whole UEF vision of creating that 1.5x growth, business-induced growth for the state of Tamil Nadu. So how do you think through a platform like UEF we can accelerate economic inclusion, and are there any quick wins that we could achieve, and what sort of follow-up activities we could do in order so that this dialogue continues and there is momentum, there are actions, there are outcomes. So I would like to get some insights from you all, maybe starting with James first, please. And this is quite a more the most key part of our whole discussion, to see how this dialogue continues, how we see we create impacts and we achieve the big vision that we aspire for the state of Tamil Nadu.
Thank you very much, Rihanna. I do want to just say, local, very quickly, we've been talking as though inclusion is only about integrating women into the workplace. And I think that is an important part, but it would be wrong to think that you solve everything just by working on that. I do want to underline that if economic inclusion includes all sectors, all communities that are excluded, of which women are the most important. But I think it would be a mistake to forego people of lower income, people without skills, all of those, if you truly want to have inclusive growth, which I think is the objective. So to get inclusive growth, I think now the economists have told, and practitioners like Irshad have showed us that you need to work at the corporate level. That's probably number one. You need to have corporations that believe in this, and that including public policy must enable them to be able to have fair employment, to have training on the job, have the kinds of the adaptations that Irshad's introduced in his firm, where you can work on shift basis, so that you can employ women adequately, that they can match in with their needs. So that's number one. Have, I would say, especially gender-friendly employment practices. And some of that comes through public policy. The firms are not going to do it on their own. The decision makers have to sort of have legislation that sets a minimum wage and that creates these opportunities. But that's not going to be enough. We heard from Hildegard that financial inclusion is really important. Financial inclusion is the possibility for women in particular, but more broadly, those at the bottom end of the scale, to participate in the economic, to have banking, to have the possibility to get financial services, to be able to borrow, and the like. And I think that there's a very interesting program India-wide that's been going on now for about 15 years, focusing on SME and medium enterprises, been quite successful. And I think that kind of approach, which is an apex operation through Indian banks, could very much target the lower end, which are women who are underserved or communities that are underserved. So financial services. Infrastructure. I think Hildegard may have said that in any case, infrastructure is often not gender neutral. It's designed in ways that serve men or serve the communities that are included. And we need to think more about infrastructure, everything from public toilets, from public transport, from access to schooling and all of the like. Then in addition, I think probably the next thing really important is to create skills enhancement. I don't want to even say schooling. It truly is a training to allow these excluded communities, women, for example, to get the kinds of skills that make them employable. Because even if you do all of the rest, financial inclusion, have the kinds of firm level policies that Irshad has, if you have infrastructure that's sort of gender neutral, if there aren't the skills, then there's no interest in firms to employ them. So we have to rethink schooling, vocational training, so that really does confer on the people who have been excluded the kinds of skills that make them useful for the kinds of firms like the one that Irshad runs, and generally the firms within Tamil Nadu. So I think there's a really important role that can be played by UEF to think through those factors. Financial inclusion, what is it that we can do with our firms in Tamil Nadu? What are the kinds of skills they need? How can we redesign our schooling and our vocational training in Tamil Nadu so that it trains people to have the kinds of skills that our firms need? I think that is very much the kind of thing that UEF needs to think about very practically about how to address these different elements that create more inclusion of these excluded communities.
Yeah, and on the point of skills development and training, I think UEF is partnering up with educational institutions spread across Tamil Nadu, and they are really working hard to see how we could create those cluster groups where we could have the right, infrastructure provided for startups, for budding entrepreneurs, or for innovative ideas. I think.
And perhaps, if I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I think one thing that we could really think about are incubators for the kind, women, major community that is excluded, have fantastic ideas as entrepreneurs, but they can't develop them into a bankable project. So having incubators that help budding female entrepreneurs or entrepreneurs from excluded groups develop it into something that's bankable that they can take to the financial sector, that is a tremendously useful.
Absolutely. And I think educational institutions can be a fundamental enabler or a catalyst to create those mediums and give that support systems for our women entrepreneurs to, to come forward and take that big leap. And of course, have that kind of a mindset and an encouragement within themselves that it is doable, and they have the right mediums of support with a platform like UEF. So on to you, Hildegard. What are your ideas and suggestions on how we take it up from here, and what are those immediate follow-on actions you think?
Thank you, Rihanna. The most important is that there is action. This is a fantastic conference. We have, I think, raised a number of issues that could be dealt with. A large number of the things that James just mentioned need a longer preparation time, but a few things could be tackled in the shorter run. So the platform, I think, is excellent to maybe in a form of a working group, in a form of an assessment center that some very examples are picked up and then put in place together, for example, with Irshad. It would be fantastic. Nothing is more convincing than success because it usually has many fathers. So why not using maybe others of our panel to work on some shorter possibilities, like, awareness raising, what is needed, what can be done, with the help of people who have already put in place. I'm very impressed what you did. I mean, shift work should not be such a difficult issue to solve a problem, but it seems, it is an easy one and a successful one. Building on some successes, but also start the work. And I would say I think it's also reaching out to other regions, not to other regions, to cities, and not centralize it too much, because people will not come to UEF. UEF possibly reaching out where they can also find alliances, because all these things also need alliances. And maybe to take this panel, the outcomes of the panel, and there are certainly other very, very valuable proposals, to make it work, to have a working group that is committing to put it in place. And the longer one, to start discussions with the authorities, with ministries, because I also have come across that people usually are very grateful for having concrete proposals and then helping them somehow to put in place. I think the person, and I come back to one thing that I said, it needs a champion. Yeah. For putting things in place. So UEF could be a champion for such future steps, and then with reaching out to a large number of people and supporters, then can put in a program for shorter and longer time to make it happen, and really to come to the inclusion and the success of inclusion and contribute to economic growth.
Yeah, thank you, Hilda. Really, some very fantastic action items. So there's a lot of work to be done, and I'm sure with your expertise, we would be get some guidance in terms of setting up that working party or a working group to take this discussion forward and start implementing some real actions. And just before closing this session, I just wanted to touch base upon the CSR aspect of the private sector. And so, Irshad, in your view, do you think the CSR initiatives of organizations can also foster activities on entrepreneurship, innovation, and things? Yes, people do come in for employment, but CSR has a different objective as such. But do you think there can be a kind of an inward CSR activity within every company where they could create that medium or an avenue for entrepreneurship and innovation for their employees? It's very bold sort of a thought process, but still I think somewhere someone has to start those conversations. So on to you, Irshad.
I think, unfortunately, CSR has become like a policy-driven, work that most corporates do because they feel they have to do, and they are mandated by local laws or whatever. And those tend to be short-lived, and those tend to be much superficial. I think it starts with us, private sector, accepting that there is an economic value in CSR. In goodwill with the local community, goodwill with the people. Creating this has got its benefits. And unless that is well understood, I believe a lot of companies and their CSR is too superficial. They just do it because it's got to be done, or they do it to be a good poster figure. And that's just not enough. And that's my concern. And I believe business schools need to teach this, that there is economic sense. There is a higher profit if you necessarily look towards social equity, work towards more social progress.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Irshad. So I think this is really getting interesting, but we are all pressed for time. So our session has to come to a close. But of course, we will be opening up the floor for further question and answers from our delegates. So before I close, I just like to put in a few remarks towards the conclusion. So I think it is now the need of the hour that public policy and corporate policies incorporate various gender-related barriers in India to ensure effective solutions. And it is for our society, we need to find ways to integrate the needs of modern workplaces with traditional homes so that they are conducive for women, so that we have more women participation in the employment aspects, as well as creating more entrepreneurs. And I think we need pushing for increased women's participation in work, which will not only fuel economic growth, but which can also address long pending problems related to inequity, poverty, and marginalization. And as Hildegard said, I think we need more of champions to promote gender inclusion, gender diversity, and to build an economically inclusive society so that everyone has a quality and a good life to live on, and leave a very good sustainable future for our future generations to come. So thank you very much, and look forward to answering the questions of our delegates. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah, I see Seema has joined. Hello, can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I could hear my own echo. Hildegard, could you please mute your mic, please?
Sure.
And help. Thank you. So yeah, so we have some really very good questions from our delegates, and I think the time is short, but I'll try to ask as many questions as possible. So first one to you, Seema. I've been part of the Hounslow's Promise charity which you initiated a few years back, and that's something very interesting concept, and I thought it would be a good opportunity here to just share some of those ideas that you implemented, and I saw some really impressive results. So I thought it would be good if we could get some ideas from you. In terms of, because you created that partnership with Cranford Community College with input from schools and community organizations. And with respect to UEF, we are collaborating with over 45 educational institutions to work together to provide business education and support. So please, can you share what initiatives you initiated or being planned, which can be used as a reference?
Well, thank you, Rahana. And I do think this is a very helpful, interesting question that follows on from the discussion, because some of the behaviors that are developed that lead to the people being confident to become entrepreneurs, to develop their networks and reach out, some of those softer skills that can make the difference between success or failure of either starting a business or continuing to have a business grow, are behaviors and habits that we can help develop in the next generation much earlier on. So the Hounslow's Promise program that's focused on education attainment, employability and social mobility is really driven by research and thinking that all those three are interconnected. That if you want people to come out of the education system being ready to play their part fully in the workplace, be confident as economic actors, and to be able to use their own networks for advice, for mentoring, multiple mentoring as well, where inputs you get aren't just from one person, then some of those structures need to be there around people from a young age. Now, societies where, or families where there's a lot of connection already, people who are well-to-do, I'll know somebody who's, the godparents of their child were, two members of the House of Lords, two other people who had been members of Parliament. There's a lot that then, young people can, in networked environments, can grow up with. But if you're coming from families and communities where that isn't the case, networks into business or into politics or into other areas of leadership, these aren't conversations at the kitchen table. So through the mentoring, we've also developed masterclass program. We had the president of the Supreme Court of the UK actually address young people and community members. And what was very interesting even from that story is I had a young person come to me and say, I had to correct my teacher, because this ended up being just after he had stepped down because of other delays that had happened. I had to correct my teacher. He's no longer the president of the Supreme Court. And they were able to take selfies, and this was all part of building contact with professions, because young people had said to me they want to be journalists, they want to be lawyers, they want to be in business, and yet they don't know people to seek that advice from. So the program is all about developing links between education, industry, community groups, so that these environments feel familiar, the rules of the game feel familiar, and people feel networked and able to see themselves succeeding in those environments.
Yeah, thank you, Seema. I have a next question from our delegate, and this is addressed to Hildegard. So how to change the perception in the society and highlight the importance of economic inclusion?
I think I would join Seema here on a very important point. The young people are eager to learn. The young people would like to have contact. So I think perception. Let's go to the youth, even earlier, maybe even at schools, to really there address what is possible for everyone. And I think that is where change of perception starts. Because children go home to their parents, parents learn more about what are the possibilities. And from that point of view, it should really rely on youth organizations, educate them more, show them what is possible. At the students' organization, I think there are a number of possibilities, but it has to start young. And then, of course, in combination with the professionals, with companies, Irshad would be one of these examples, because nothing is more convincing than success and good example. So I would really go to the younger people, start there in good combination with professionals, with governments, I think with organizations, and that, in my view, is should be a very successful way of changing perception, of course, over time.
That's very well said, Hildegard. This question I had more from my side. This is for James, because during the session you mentioned about financial inclusion, and this is something I just because we couldn't explore much on that point, so I reserved one question for myself to ask you during the Q&A session. So I just wanted to give a little statistic before I could ask that question to you, James. The World Bank Group identified a global credit gap of around $285 billion for women entrepreneurs. And according to recently released Goldman Sachs research giving credit, where it is due, closing this gap could increase per capita income by up to 12% by 2030. So that's quite a very significant research from an organization like Goldman Sachs. So on that basis, I would like to please ask you why financial inclusion matters. And the biggest challenge for women entrepreneurs is access to credit. I mean, myself, being as an entrepreneur, yes, I did face those challenges initially when I started my business here in the UK. And so how do you see UEF as a platform that can help advance women's financial inclusion? And this is where we are talking about this topic. This financial inclusion is a very vital aspect in terms of how this can enable or make those ideas into realities and growth stories. So on that basis, I would like to get to know your thoughts about financial inclusion, please.
Sure. Thank you, Rihanna. Very, very interesting and very important. We heard that inclusion really has three sort of pillars. We heard it has financial inclusion, it has gender neutral or inclusion friendly infrastructure, and it has skills enhancement. Of financial inclusion, of these three, financial inclusion is in my mind the most important. Why? Because if we create employable women or excluded groups, they will need obviously financial services, banking, possibility of lending, but more importantly, I think we have to see that excluded women are an enormous reservoir for entrepreneur development of small enterprises, micro enterprises that create labor, that create employment and the like. And they will need, at the heart of this, they will need access to financial services. So this is absolutely critical. I think that the World Bank, spent 25 years in that august institution, has come to realize it's not microfinance, it's financial inclusion. And so now what do we mean practically? It means getting banks to change the kinds of products that they provide. In Africa, 100 million people use banking through their cell phones, and these are not smartphones, through SMS. It's called M-Pesa. And it wasn't done by the World Bank. It wasn't done by NGOs. It's created financial inclusion for 100 million low-income Africans. Now, these are technological solutions, products that are adapted to the communities, things that are understandable to the people who are going to use them. Financial inclusion is essential. The role UEF can play here is really interesting and important. What is UEF? It's a forum that has credibility and that has convening power. You bring people together. Look at all the people who've come over these past few days to listen and to discuss and to share. I think UEF has a key role to play on financial inclusion in Tamil Nadu and perhaps in India more broadly, by essentially indicating what are the obstacles and what are some of the solutions through things like white papers, policy papers, things that can be distributed to the banking sector, but also to policymakers, generally to get this important issue raised in everyone's attention and perhaps already start converging towards some of the solutions. So I think UEF has a key role to play in bringing financial inclusion to the table as a problem that needs to be addressed as quickly as possible.
Thank you, James. I have a very interesting question for Irshad. I mean, you are the third generation entrepreneur in your family business. So how can we encourage more women to be second generation of entrepreneur leaders in family businesses?
Thank you, Rihanna. I think it starts with social, breaking social barriers. It starts at home. Starts with you discussing and including, the next generation, irrespective of gender, into your discussions about business, taking their input and encouraging them to be a part of the challenges that you face, and that is how you start. I mean, that is how it starts for whether if you're a male or female. In my opinion, it starts with mentoring at home, and it's a powerful opportunity that we have as entrepreneurs to encourage the next generation to participate in the business and take it forward. So in my opinion, it's comes down to mentoring at home and then giving them the opportunity to try their skills at the next level.
Yeah, thank you. I think very well put. And of course, it relates to what the earlier question one of the delegates asked in terms of the perception, which Hildegard answered. There's another back-to-back question someone has asked again to Irshad. So can you share about the management training program you started at your company? I think someone has read a little about your company before they came for this summit. So they are quite keen to ask you, what sort of quick wins you achieved and how successful this management training program was, especially focusing on women, or were there any challenges as such?
It was initially when we decided to bring in, give more opportunities. We first took a survey, and we were surprised to find that we had over 400 graduates in our workforce who were working at entry-level positions who had not been given the opportunity. So we then, when we took the first step to try to bring them into the management, we encountered, surprisingly, social issues, challenges that prevented them from actually going, getting to higher positions of pay, because it would have meant that their salaries would have been higher than what their spouses made, and they were nervous to take up some of these opportunities. So we had to do counseling with the families to give them, to make them understand that there is an opportunity to grow and to allow them to actually to participate in this growth. So once we did that, and I'll share one particular example of a young lady supervisor who joined who took up the opportunity and gave us an idea that transformed a major part of our process and led to a saving of hundreds of thousands of dollars. It was just one idea from one of our staff, and it eventually, our clients went out and implemented it across the globe, and the savings for the brand were in the millions from just an idea that came out from this young 22-year-old graduate student who told us, why not try this way as opposed to how you've been doing it for 20 years.
Wow, very impressive. So thank you, Irshad. Our next question that has come in is for Seema. You mentioned about industry working together with educational institutions. So they would like to know how this collaboration can work to promote economic inclusion, because you just briefly touched, I think, so maybe they want a little more detailed insights into that.
I think that this is very important, because you talked, Rahana, about how whilst we look at economic progress and inclusion, we also can look wider at where there can be problems that can be solved, because we make choices as we develop economic growth and an economic strategy. It too will have outcomes that can be both positive or negative for the prosperity of communities and also the well-being of our planet. These are the kind of triple kind of challenges that we face. And I think what is important is that we are looking to how we're preparing young people, particularly, to have the tools to realize their own goals and their own ambitions, and to turn into productive economic activity the knowledge that they gain. We hear too many criticisms as well of the education system, that those that come out of the system aren't ready to go into the workplace and to be productive. And then employers say, well, they don't have the budgets to train people as much, or equally you can have behaviors that are not positive employability behaviors that have to be unlearned, and these things can hold back people who are very bright but struggle to be productive in teams or in different cultures. So an all-round education, in my view, does require exposure and experience in the world of work prior to completing formal education. It's one of the reasons why I also believe in compulsory work experience. We had this before in the UK, but it was then withdrawn as a requirement from our schools. And this was in around 2013. When I looked into this, I found in the first year that there had been 60,000 fewer work experience placements offered for young people in school of sort of 14, 15, 16 years old. My experience learning from what's worked for many people when they've talked to me about what's made the difference for them when they're older, also from studies that we've done, kind of field trips, if you like, with Chicago and other areas, is that understanding the world of work and being able to feel confident in those environments is very critical to success. And women have said to me, when I did some studies on, we were doing a research and report on what would help inform strategies for women's entrepreneurship, is that even though women decided to start businesses later on in life, when they were 30, 35, 40, possibly as a result of when they've had children and looking for a change in their lives, that if they had learned and understood what it took when they were 16, 17, 18, that journey would have been much less hard for them, because that's what we hear again and again. It's harder, and women's businesses don't last as long. Now, I'm using that just an example, because if we want to give people the tools to grow and to be confident in the world of work as we had it, or the economic environment, or the labour market, how we structure learning at school and how we do that beyond the classroom is a very important part of that. And that requires employers and government to play their part too.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. One last question to both James and Hildegard. What kind of tangible results do you think UEF can achieve in the next 2 years? And what are the strategies and key action items that UEF can take from now until then? Because we have our summit. Someone has really thought very well, I think. A very valid question for us to see some action here after the summit. So we have our summits every 2 years. So I think it's a good period of length of time. And thank you to whoever has asked this question. I couldn't see the name of the person, but quite a valid point, and it's a good question for us to really sum up the whole thing, I feel, to close this session on a positive note. On to you, maybe first, would you like to? We just have only 3 minutes, so if you could please.
Okay. Shall I just take one, James? I would like to.
This is a very important question, so if you had to exceed a couple more, a few more seconds, happy to do so, please.
I would very much just join what James has said. I think UEF can play a key role, financial inclusion, but also bringing people together. And that can be through their tools, through the contacts. As Seema said, there are programs in the world that can be used as a good example, going even at the level of the family, as Irshad said. It's very important here. And I think using their connections, using this event as a follow-up is for me one tool. And then the outcome should really be hopefully also tangible, because building on such an important event is the right platform for the future. James. Thank you.
I couldn't agree more with Hildegard. She's absolutely put her finger on. It would be such a pity if after all this good stuff, everything just stops now and goes into the freezer for 2 years. So I think it's really important for us for UEF to continue moving forward by things like policy papers, white papers, essentially making more public these issues and what needs to be done to address them over the 2 years. Continuous production of material that can reach policymakers, important decision makers.
Yeah, maybe Seema and Irshad, would you like to give in your last few comments?
So I could just add one thing to that. I totally agree with what Hildegard and James have just said. And I think, I'd be very interested to learn about the progress made, what's tried, what works, because I've said this in events before, and particularly when I've been in India and learning. There is so much we have to learn from each other, and in fact, so much reverse learning. We think that it's about India learning from the rest of the world, but actually there's so much that we have, and I think for my constituency, to learn from India, experience of Mandeshi Bank in Maharashtra and so many other places, taking very different approaches and challenging the cultures and the way things are, and seeing tremendous results around entrepreneurship and whole communities developing together with a real transformation for the children as a whole in those communities. And I do want to just leave this message that I think we'd all be very interested to see how this progress goes forward, and to be committed to be part of that, to be sounding boards, and to come back in 2 years' time to say, what worked and what can we learn. And I think this is a very important journey and a really impressive conference. So thank you to all who are taking part.
Thank you, Seema. Irshad, your final comments?
I'd like to say that I feel pretty confident that our president, under his dynamic leadership, President Ahmed Buhari, is going to make sure and ensure that the process, the contribution of UEF to nation building is 110%. So he is all for social equity and for nation building. So I think we can be confident that we will see results, and he is not one to take it easy and take a back seat. He's there to drive us to make sure that we deliver on our nation promise.
Yeah, I think we have a great inclusive leader, and I think by organizing this summit and this topic, I think it was really well thought and placed it at the right moment so that we discuss this, we close the summit, and then we have some follow-up actions. So I would like to now conclude this session. So thank you to all the panelists for sharing their fantastic thoughts and highlighting the urgency of economic inclusion. It is now a question to ask ourselves, practices reflect the society we live in? The urgency is now to change our thought process and see how each of us attending this World Summit can be a change champion to encourage and implement economic inclusion to achieve sustainable economic growth. So gender parity is not just a women's issue. We need the support of men too. It's time to stand up now to support your mothers, your sisters, your spouses, your daughters, and only then the circle of society is complete. And finally, I have a message to all the women delegates attending the summit. You need to take responsibility of your life, and your economic empowerment is in your hands, and UEF can be that platform to handhold you in your entrepreneurial journey. And without you as partners, we cannot build a beautiful society, a progressive state, and a country. And finally, to conclude, in the words of Shirley Chisholm, the first African American woman elected to the US Congress, if they don't give you a seat at the table, bring a folding chair. And this is something I've practiced in my life, and it works. And only then we can imagine, impact, and inspire. So thank you, everyone. And I hope you all enjoyed the summit and the panel discussion. Thank you.
A big note of appreciation for our wonderful speakers and the moderator for telling us what inclusivity in diversity is all about, and for helping us to dare to dream.